My name is Paula Clark. I'm a social worker at the Bureau of Adoptions, and the story you are about to see is true. He seems to like you. I'm so glad you brought us together, Reverend Gould.
I trust something can be worked out. You know how I feel about it. Well, I'm sure you two must have things to discuss. If you'll excuse me.
Well, what do you think of that, huh? What do you think that is, what?
Reverend Gould is right. Danny would be a lucky child to have you for his mother.
Oh, I'd be the lucky one.
Come on, Danny. Oh, come on, darling. Come on. I better get going. If I don't get a job, my landlady's going to give me the bum's rush. Yeah. When the adoption papers are ready, Reverend Gould knows where to find me.
You mean you want to leave Danny with me now?
Sure. That's what you want, isn't it?
Before anything's arranged? Well, I really don't know you. I've just met you. I've got to talk this over with my husband.
Well, you said he likes children. Look, you won't find a nicer, sweeter kid than Danny. Believe me, Mrs. Carson.
I just can't take him like this. There are arrangements, papers to be signed. Now, listen, my dear, my husband will be back Monday. We'll all get together and work things out.
I can't. Well, don't you see? If I don't leave Danny now, I don't know if I'll ever get the guts to give him up again. The petition to adopt baby boy Blake was referred to us by the Superior Court of Los Angeles, October 20th. It's the Blake case. I have a home visit this morning with the adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carson.
I'm worried about that case. How long have they had the child?
6 weeks.
Well, I'd like a report on it as soon as it's completed. The child doesn't belong there. The sooner we reach a decision, the better.
I was up most of the night trying to figure out what to do with it.
Well, I thought Tuesday night was your bowling night. Your husband must have been disappointed.
I'll have you know Bob's a very understanding husband. Besides, our team did better without me.
Let me know if you run into any trouble.
I will. The Carsons lived on Arden Drive, a fashionable section of Hollywood when the movies were young. It is now a middle-class residential district with trees, well-kept lawns, and children. Good morning, I'm Paula Clark.
We've been expecting you. Won't you come in?
Thank you. My first impression of Mrs. Carson was good, as was my impression of her husband, Stuart Carson. Also present was their attorney, Mr. Sherman. They were pleasant, courteous, and frightened.
Oh, please sit down.
Thank you. I understand you're a CPA, Mr. Carson, an accountant.
Well, that's right. Mrs. Carson was my secretary.
I married the boss.
She still comes down to the office occasionally. Well, not anymore, of course.
It broke up the day. I had so much time on my hands.
I understand, Mr. Carson, that you were out of town when Mrs. Carson got the child.
Yes, I was up in Seattle. I just got back to the hotel when Martha called and said, "Stu, I've had a baby."
Got a baby, dear.
Well, anyhow, I knew I was a father. Naturally, I was excited, and I went out and bought a box of cigars, and I was passing them out to the guests and the bellhop and the clerks and everybody.
He wanted me to get a nurse, but I thought it best that Danny and I start out together.
I think you were right. Now, let me see. I don't have a copy of Danny's birth certificate. Do you know anything about it, Mr. Sherman?
There seems to be some question regarding the location of birth. A question of which county, but I have the Bureau of Vital Statistics working on it.
That's fine, because the court will require it. You see, without Danny's birth certificate, we have no proof as to who his legal parents are.
I'll have the word on it in a day or so.
Also, I don't have the address of the father, Charles Blake.
For a very good reason. We can't locate him. Our last report was that he was in prison. You see, Mrs. Blake hasn't heard from her husband in almost 2 years. She has since secured a divorce on grounds of desertion and was awarded custody of the child. We have her consent.
Well, that's fine. But without his written consent, there's a question as to his intentions. You see, regardless of the divorce, the father has certain rights over his child.
Well, if he doesn't give his written consent, does that mean you'll take Danny away from us?
Mr. Carson, I have nothing to do with it. Our agency merely gathers the facts and reports them to the court. Then it's up to the judge.
But suppose we can't find him.
Then you're leaving a loophole in the adoption. He could come back later and try to take Danny.
Well, now, I doubt that any court would remove the child from the security of this fine home to give it to an ex-convict.
But let's avoid the possibility if we can.
We might institute abandonment proceedings.
Yes, but that would take months.
Hello, Mommy.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, Danny, did you have a nice nap, huh? Oh, you're such a good boy. You're such a good boy.
Larry, find that man Blake. Get an investigator. I don't care what it costs.
I'll get on it right away. Bye, Mrs. Clark.
Goodbye, Mr. Sherman.
He's not quite awake yet.
What have you got there, Danny? What's this?
Don't you?
It's a gun? Does it make a lot of noise?
Yes, indeed it does. I better take him you know where.
Bye, Danny.
Come on, Danny. Up we go.
Goodbye, Mr. Carson. You'll be hearing from me.
Mrs. Clark, I'd consider it a very great favor if you could hurry things along. This waiting, not knowing whether Danny is ours or not, it's been a strain on my wife. We waited 11 years for that child. If anything should go wrong,
I'll do my best.
thank you very much.
Goodbye. My next step was an interview with the natural mother. Barbara Blake was employed as a car hop at a drive-in near Malibu.
When I gave the baby to Mrs. Carson and signed all those papers for the attorney, I thought that was it. They didn't tell me I'd have to go through all this adoption bureau routine.
Oh, yes, it's the law.
The law. Is something wrong? Look, all I wanted was a good home for my baby. Now, I didn't take any money from them, not a cent.
It's nothing like that, Barbara. I just want to talk with you about you and Danny. Won't you sit down?